right, folks, I've got an interesting one for you today. We're going to start some arguments. Today we're going to compare our recently finished off Oldsmobile 455 crap gas motor and we're going to compare it against Bob McVeigh's recently finished off 454 big block Chevrolet aluminum headed truck motor. Now, both of these motors have very, very similar build styles. They're both designed to pull around really big, heavy vehicles. One just happens to be a big Oldsmobile versus a big Chevy truck. But they're basically a very similar build style, so I thought it would be a very interesting comparison to be able to run down. Now, both of them have very similar actual displacement. The Oldsmobile is a 30 over 455, the Chevrolet is a 30 over 454, so essentially the same idea. Both are aluminum headed. Both of them have roller camshafts, so there's a lot you can compare it here. Both of them have the exact same Performer RPM intake manifold on them. There's a lot of things that you're going to be able to compare here. It's about as close as we're going to get with apples to apples comparison, and I've got a screenshot that I want to be able to share with you that Bob McVeigh sent me before he flew himself down to Florida, so we can actually see the data of these things laying over themselves, and we can really talk about what these two bring to the table, the pros and the cons, and how they all shook out. So let me get inside of my desk here real quick, and we're going to actually compare these two results. Now, the first thing I want to talk about before we go any further is, yes, I understand it's easier to make power on a big block Chevrolet and a small block Chevrolet than it is on everything else. It's easier and cheaper to do it. The parts availability is there, the aftermarket supply is there. That's not even something I'm going to argue about. It's just a fact. Just like LS's, they make good power on a budget. No questions asked. There's a reason that those things have owned the sports car, race car, drag racing, hot rod world for generations now. But not everybody likes to see the same exact thing under the hood of every single race car and every single hot rod. A lot of us, myself included, like to see our brands represented out there underneath the hood of our hot rods. So in my case, yeah, I could absolutely put a big block Chevrolet under the hood of that thing and make it go insanely fast for considerably less than I have in my Pontiac. But with our Oldsmobile customer, he's got a big body Oldsmobile and he wants it to be Oldsmobile powered. So that's what we built for his vehicle. Now, you can do that whatever you'd like with yours, but this gives us the opportunity to compare these two engine builds and these two different ways of getting about the same, essentially the same amount of power out of two rather different engine build setups. So the next thing I want to address is going to be compression. The crap gas Oldsmobile we built is about a 9.5 to 1 compression on aluminum heads. So that's going to allow that motor to run very, very comfortably on 87 octane with zero worry about being able to run into any gas station anywhere on the country and be able to pick up crappy fuel and be able to perform just perfectly fine. We could absolutely have built this thing to run 10.5, 11.5 to 1 compression. Your window of safety gets considerably smaller on fuel supplies and with tuning. This gives us a lot more leeway and safety space. This was not something where we were trying to aim for the moon and try to make the most power we possibly could. If we were trying to do that, we would absolutely have done a lot of different things compared to what we ended up doing. Now, the compression ratio on the big block Chevrolet, on the 454 Chevrolet, that is about a 10.5 to 1 compression, also on aluminum heads, so very, very much within safe ranges, but you're going to probably want to run not 87 octane in that thing. You're going to probably want to run a mid-grade or a higher grade gasoline. Compression is conversation. That's a whole big crazy conversation, especially when you're talking cranking compression versus dynamic compression and camshafts and timing, and there's a lot that goes into that conversation, and that's not what this video is going to be. We're just going to compare the two of them as they are, as they were built, and what their functions were, and what the numbers are. Capiche? We could have all the other conversations. That's probably something you'd want to do in a live anyway, so we could argue back and forth and not just do it in the comment section. So let's start with the Oldsmobile. Again, 455, 30 over, 9.5 to 1 compression. This is topped with Edelbrock Performer RPM heads. They are, as they came out of the box, 0 porting done to these heads. However, we did upgrade the springs that were in this to be able to accommodate for the fact that we switched from a flat tappet camshaft to a roller camshaft. Otherwise, we didn't touch these things at all. We did no porting, polishing, no change of anything else. Purely just a spring upgrade to handle the camshaft change. And as you can see here, these are the just basic Edelbrock Big Block Performer RPM heads for an aluminum, or for a Oldsmobile. And they were also paired with a Edelbrock Performer RPM intake manifold, same thing that's on both sides. On top of the Edelbrock Performer RPM heads and Edelbrock Performer intake manifold, we did run a Holley Terminator fuel injection system on this. Now, EFI is something that is a fantastic thing that we now see in the environment of the hot rod world. We're big fans of the Terminators. You can find them in all kinds of things, from classic race cars to hot rods to serious race cars. But a lot of times your people are going to see a little bit of a decrease in maximum power on full wide open throttle on the self-tuning features of these Holley systems, or just generally any of the TBI style fuel injection systems. Now you can tune a lot of that out if you're going really hardcore into the tuning tables and being able to adjust things. We didn't go that far. We just let this thing do what it's supposed to do and learn itself. And we did try, it is also running the Holley Hyperspark distributor system, so we were able to adjust timing based on what we tell the distributor to do. And we did try a number of different timing settings on this Oldsmobile to be able to get it exactly where we want it to be, and the maximum performance that we can get out of that motor. And what's interesting is we found out that that motor and the combination we had put together at this makes maximum power at 30 degrees of timing. Total timing was 30 degrees. And that's interesting because legacy knowledge would tell you that it actually wants to have more timing. But the more timing we put into this thing, it actually ended up losing power as we put more power into it. We also made some runs where we took power, or we took timing away from it. And it also, again, lost power. So maximum power was found at 30 degrees timing, and we ended up making essentially 500 horsepower and 550 foot-pounds of torque. The actual numbers would be 495 horsepower and 549 foot-pounds of torque. And our goal in this motor was to make 500 and 500, thereabouts. And you know, we absolutely got there. We're there exactly what we need. You're not going to feel in the seat of the pants dyno 4 or 5 horsepower difference. And again, that number is certainly there if we really wanted to get crazy and really drill into being able to squeeze the absolute most out of this combination. But it really wasn't worth it. It's not something you're going to find, you're going to feel. You're definitely not going to feel it in the seat of the pants in the car. I will show you guys the dyno overlay here in just a second because I've only got one screenshot to show this. But let's talk about the Chevy first. So 454 Chevrolet, 30 over, 10.5 to 1 compression, profile or aluminum heads, not the Edelbrock heads. Does have the Edelbrock Performer RPM dual plane intake manifold. Now that is also running a carbureted setup, not an EFI. This is going into a kind of a hot rod truck. And it is a very similar cam design. It is still a roller cam design, and it's very similar power delivery for what we're looking for, is that lower end grunt to be able to pull around a big vehicle. And we saw very, very, very similar power graphs to these two. They performed very similarly. Now, obviously, we're not going to get into the conversation of cost. Cost-benefit analysis is not what I do. But yes, the Chevrolet is going to be the more cost-effective version of this. Let's just go ahead and say that that's the case. But the Chevrolet ended up making 506 horsepower and 566 foot-pounds of torque. Interestingly, the peak torque on both the the Oldsmobile and the big block Chevy were almost at identical at 3,600 RPMs. Peak power was at between 5,400 RPMs and 5,600 RPMs. The Chevrolet actually made a little bit earlier peak power than the Oldsmobile did, but very, very similar numbers. I mean, you're talking within 15 foot-pounds, 16 foot-pounds of torque and 10 horsepower difference, and that's something to be said. I mean, there's a lot of things that are there, and it's interesting to see how these two are going to lay over. So let me go ahead and give you guys the graph so you can see exactly what these two things look like, and you can see how these two engines compare as far as the actual dyno curves go. So as you can see, big blocks, big displacement. They pick up power low on the RPM range, and they carry it pretty well. You know, horsepower is a factor of torque over RPM. So the longer you can carry that torque curve out, the better. And you can see obviously that the big block Chevrolet made more torque through the entire RPM range. You can see a little bit more undulation in the Oldsmobile power band as the EFI system is learning itself, because we didn't really get a chance to fully tune this thing. So it's just kind of hunting around a little bit and making its adjustments as it possibly can as we're pulling it on the fly. So you see a little bit cleaner line on the Chevrolet, but it does make more torque. It makes more horsepower across the entire RPM band, all the way up from where we grabbed it at whatever it was, 2,500 RPMs or so, all the way up to 6,000 or so RPMs where we pulled it to. And it's interesting to see the two. Now, is that going to translate into more enjoyability? Hard to say. That's a matter of perspective. Is it going to translate into fuel economy? Probably not. They're probably going to get about the same thing. Will it make either of these things more enjoyable? I don't know. I don't think you'd notice it, to be honest with you. Maybe some of the torque a little bit in the big block Chevrolet, but the Oldsmobiles did really, really well. Also, take into factor, the Oldsmobile's doing this on really crap gas. This is on 87 octane. So, you know, if we threw better octane at it and we built it to be higher compression to be able to handle that better octane, typically speaking, the rule of thumb is about a 2% power gain per point of compression. So between a 9.5 to 1 and a 10.5 to 1 compression motor, if we saw 2% gain over 400 or call it 500 horsepower, that's 10 horsepower. Well, there's only a 10 horsepower difference between these two, peak horsepower wise. So that would make up that difference. Same thing in the torque range. You know, the extra compression would generate more torque. So it would have absorbed some of that difference between the two. And then there's also other conversations to be had. There's other differences and discrepancies between these two products, between these two motor setups. The Oldsmobile one ran on a set of actual car headers. These are the headers that are going to be in that car, or on that motor in that car. Whereas the big block Chevrolet ran on a set of show and felt dyno headers, which have a much wider sweep out on them, and they're probably going to flow a little bit better. You know, there's definitely some power to be found there. And then the biggest question of all is the difference in heads. The difference in heads between those profilers and the Edelbrock heads. We want to compare apples to apples, and when it comes into the heads, that's where it becomes apples to oranges. There's a drastic difference between the Edelbrock Performer RPM heads and those profiler heads that were on the Chevrolet. And I think that's really the star of the show and where that main difference is in power band. The Edelbrock RPM heads are good heads. They're quality heads, and they're pretty good out of the box. Could it have benefited from porting? Absolutely. You could have absolutely found more power out of that. Those profiler heads, though, as they are set up, they have a better, bigger intake runner, and they have better intake and exhaust valves, bigger intake exhaust valves. And at the end of the day, that's the biggest conversation as far as making raw power. It's how much air a motor can bring in, process, and get rid of. The more you can do that, the more power the engine's gonna make. At the end of the day, doesn't matter. I don't think so. Not really at all. Are you going to notice the difference between those two? If they were in exactly the same chassis with exactly the same transmission, wheel and tire and brake and, you know, all that stuff, yeah, the Chevrolet would outrun that Oldsmobile a little bit. But that's not going to happen. And that's not what we're building these things for. That's not what it matters. That's, at the end of the day, neither of these things are going in race cars. They're going in fun, classic American muscle cars to go make beautiful V8 American noises and have fun. Go get ice cream. Make people smile. I would be happy with either of those two, to be honest with you. This is a 455 Le Mans. I think we did 20 over on this 455. So 460 cubic inches, somewhere in that range, 9.5 to 1 compression, cast iron heads. It made 440 horsepower and 520 foot-pounds of torque. But I'm limited because I have factory cast iron heads on this thing. We haven't done any porting with. If I bolted a set of heads on it, it's going to make a ton more power. It'd probably make, I don't know, 100 horsepower more than what I make now. Would it improve my enjoyability of the car? I don't know. Maybe. Maybe not. But I didn't build the car to be able to handle that extra power, so there's a good chance I'd probably break a lot of things that are attached to it. So it is what it is. Anyways, guys, that's the conversation. That's where we are. That's the honest to God's truth about what these two look like and how they performed against each other. I think it worked out pretty well. I'm super excited about how it worked out. I'm very excited to see how our customer enjoys his Oldsmobile 455. And I'm very glad to Bob and the gentleman that allowed me to come up and film the 454 Chevrolet. What do you think? Are you a Chevrolet guy because they are just tried and true and undeniably the kings of the big block world and undeniably the kings of a budget power? Or do you prefer to have one of those things that's a little bit of an off-brand? Are you maybe even a Mopar person, for God's sakes? Let me know in the comments below. If you want to see some of this stuff, I'll do whatever I can. Obviously, I've got some more dyno stuff coming up with my own personal stuff. I've got 2 Pontiac 350s coming, and we're going to dyno a 350 standard Pontiac motor versus a 350 HO with a roller camshaft and all the goodies we can throw at it to see if the juice is worth the squeeze, if the extra spend is worth the fun. We'll find out on the dyno, and we'll find out in the chassis, I guess. But there's going to be a lot more dyno content coming. Bob is down in vacation in Florida for a while, so while he's working on his tan, I'm going to be working on a bunch of my own projects. If you want to watch that kind of stuff and you're interested in that, you can put up with me and my big bearded self. Click on the subscribe button. It'd be great to see you again. If not, thanks for making it here. I appreciate you. Hopefully you learned something. Hopefully it was an interesting video for you. Let me know what I can do for you better in the future. Take care. Have a good one. Bye-bye.